Welcome, Dr. Brusatte.
Thanks. Well, it's great to see everybody on here, and I haven't really been keeping up today. I meant to, but it was a beautiful day here in Scotland, and that's a really rare thing. It's my first Father's Day tomorrow, so we did a little family thing. We're still mostly on lockdown, but some of the parks and stuff have opened. So I haven't been seeing what's been going on, but I've checked on Twitter here and there. It looks like it's been a really great day, and just thanks to all of you who have organized this. I just think it's wonderful, and I hope that you're getting a lot of support and you're feeling a lot of enthusiasm from people. So really, for the next little chunk of time, I have a million PowerPoints. I think all of us who teach university courses and do public talks and stuff do. I have one that I could give, or at least kind of lead through some slides on some of the new discoveries we're making here in Scotland. And so I think I can start with that if that sounds good, and then just leave plenty of time for questions and discussion, or really anything anybody wants to talk about, whether it's about any of the research that I've done with my colleagues, my students, or whether it's stuff about dinosaur evolution in general, whether it's Jurassic World stuff. There's not much I can say there yet, but if people want to chat there. So does that sound good? A little bit of a Scottish PowerPoint and then some discussion?
Sounds great.
Okay, good. So let me do the screen share here. Okay, and I'm just going to get this up. Okay, and you're seeing this slideshow? Does that look good?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I won't go through the whole formal talk. These are just some slides that I put together, about 8 months ago now, right around the time my son was born, for the Geological Society here in Edinburgh. So I'm talking to you from Scotland, from Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland. And obviously, those of you that know me know that I'm not Scottish. Those of you who've never met me, I think you can tell right away from the way I'm talking that I'm not Scottish. I grew up around the Chicago area, and through fate, really, the fate that blows the winds of the academic world, that brought me here about 7.5 years ago. And so I've been really blessed, fortunate since I've been here to start working with a lot of other Scottish paleontologists and start working with a lot of students as well in Scotland, doing field work, going out looking for dinosaurs and other fossils. And so this is just a little peek at some of the stuff we've been doing, including some of the most recent discoveries. I should say, I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, which is one of Scotland's main universities, a very old university. It goes back to the 1580s, which is really just an amazing thing for somebody like me that comes from academic backgrounds of universities that are much, much younger than that. And Edinburgh has a very long legacy in the history of paleontology, the history of geology. James Hutton was an Edinburgh graduate, and a lot of very famous paleontologists all the way up recently to Ewan Clarkson, the guy who wrote the invertebrate textbook that many of us used to have taught here. So it's an amazing place, and we have a very active paleontology program now in the School of Geosciences where I teach. So, we have an undergraduate program, we have a master's program, we have PhD students. So please, if anybody has any questions about our program, you can either ask me, a little bit later in the chat, or just get in touch over email. And by the way, my email, which is on this slide, feel free just to drop me a message. Anybody you just want to say hi, you got any questions, just let me know. I'm pretty good at replying to messages from anybody who wants to chat dinosaurs. Okay, that's enough. Let me tell you a little bit about the fossils that we have in Scotland. So I don't think Scotland fits the stereotype. There's so many stereotypes in the world about so many different things. And with paleontology, there are tons of stereotypes, some of which are, not so problematic and some of which are, like that stupid Dino Cowboy show, for instance. Shows like that, you see that on television, it gives you an impression of what paleontology is and who does paleontology and where you find fossils. And you often get the impression, there's lots of impressions that programs like that give, but at least when it comes to where you find fossils, you often get that picture that you have to go to the desert, you have to go to the Badlands, it's, you know, places where it's hot, where it's dry, where you go out and you dust sand off of the bones and these beautiful skeletons emerge, and that's what digging up dinosaurs is. And that is true in some parts of the world, of course, but that's only one type of place where you can find dinosaurs. And people are finding dinosaurs all over the world now. It is this incredible time, this golden age, really, where people are finding on average about a new species every week. And that is because there are people looking all over the world now in many places where people never looked before or didn't have many opportunities to look before. And a lot of the great new discoveries are coming from China, from Argentina, from Brazil, but also from places like Scotland. And so in Scotland, it's a small country, great country when it comes to geology, great country when it comes to the rock record. So many classic geological sites, especially for studying structural geology and mountain building and plate tectonics and so on. And there are, you know, a decent number of fossil sites here. Some of the most famous fossils in the world, really. You know, the oldest really good terrestrial ecosystem, the Rhynie chert, is Scottish. Some of the very oldest tetrapods, those fishes that you know, sprouted limbs and digits and moved onto the land, are from Scotland, and so many other very famous fossils. Not so much from the Mesozoic, though. Not so much from the age of dinosaurs, but there's one exception, and that is there are Scottish fossils that are from the Jurassic period. And that's a period of time that, as many of us know, when the Earth was very different. The Earth looked more or less like this on the screen. Pangaea, the supercontinent, was starting to split up. North America was splitting from Europe and Asia. Sea levels were higher. What is now Europe was largely flooded. There were some small land masses, and Scotland, or at least part of Scotland, was part of one of those small little islands that was perched in the middle of what was then a very narrow Atlantic Ocean, because the continents were just beginning to separate. And dinosaurs lived in Scotland, on that little Scottish island at that time, and mammals and crocodiles and all kinds of things, and they left their fossils. They left their fossils in the rocks, and there is really only one place in Scotland where you can find them, and that's this really enchanted, gorgeous, beautiful island off the west coast of Scotland, part of the Hebrides chain of islands, and this is the Isle of Skye. It just happens to be the one place where there are Jurassic rocks that are preserved, and those rocks are accessible, they're exposed, they're mostly exposed along the coast of the island. Skye is really an otherworldly place. It's a hard place, you know, to find the right adjectives to describe. It really is a kind of a Tolkien-esque world. It does have this enchanted feeling to it, and this is just one image of Skye, and it's full of this beautiful imagery of moors, of peat bogs, of craggy peaks. Of course, there's a beautiful whiskey distillery on Skye called the Talisker Distillery, and there's lots of tourists. Lots of tourists go to Skye now, in large part because a lot of big Hollywood blockbusters have been filmed on Skye because of this absolutely stunning landscape. But for us, Skye is also stunning because it preserves Jurassic Age fossils. So when I started my position in Edinburgh, one of the first things I did was go off to Skye with a couple of colleagues from my new department, just to see what was there. Now, in the 1980s was when the first Sky Dinosaur was found, and it was a single footprint that fell from a cliff. That's it. And it's really kind of remarkable to think about that, because dinosaur fossils have been found, you know, for thousands of years, of course, all over the world. And if you compare to England, there were people that were finding dinosaur bones, that were describing them, that were talking about them, that were, you know, writing about them, calling them dinosaurs, with, you know, Owen and Mantell and Buckland and that whole crowd, all the way back to the early 1800s, and really even before that. We know there were people in England finding dinosaur bones before then. In Scotland, it was only the 1980s that we have the first record of anybody finding and talking about a dinosaur fossil, this one footprint. And following up from that, there were a few bones that were found in the 1990s, and not much more, not a whole lot more. There's a paleontologist named Neil Clark in Glasgow who has done a lot of work on Skye over the years. But he was really, working on his own with another guy, though, that I'll talk about in a moment, a very important guy. So that was the stage, really, when I started in Edinburgh. We knew there were dinosaurs on Skye. We knew that there were footprints. We knew there were bones. There weren't a lot of them. We knew they were Jurassic, and we knew, in fact, they were from the Middle Jurassic. That's a really poorly known interval of time. Often the middle parts of geological periods are quite poorly known. And this was about 170 million years ago, by the way. So we knew all of that stuff, and it just seemed like a tempting place to go. And let's face it, I was hired in Scotland, so I wanted to find Scottish dinosaurs. I dug up dinosaurs in other parts of the world, but this was my new home, and I wanted to become part of the Scottish community. So we went out to Skye. We started doing yearly trips, and they became a lot of fun, and we started to find a lot of stuff. Now, Skye is a challenging place to work in many ways. It does not fit that stereotype. This picture does not look like the sort of fossil hunting or dinosaur digging you see on a lot of TV shows. Skye is generally quite cold. It's pretty far north. It's about 56 degrees north latitude. It's rainy. I mean, it is damp, moist, wet pretty much all the time. That's not to say it's always pouring down rain, but it often is pouring down rain, and it's just generally a pretty damp place. During the summer months, it's full of midges. It's a windy place as well, and the rocks that have the fossils in them are mostly exposed along the coast. So you're working on the coast, you're getting battered by the wind, the waves, and everything's tidal. It's totally dependent on the tides. That's one of the most peculiar things about working on the Isle of Skye. In order to even start looking for dinosaur bones or footprints, you have to consult a tide table. And so that tide table is one of our most valuable tools, along with our rock hammers and chisels and so on. So this is just a picture of us doing some work there. Now, one of the great things about Skye and about our program is it's a place where I've been able to take our students. So it's basically become a field laboratory to train. In some cases, some of the undergraduate students, although we do other field training for paleontology for the undergrads, a little bit closer to Edinburgh, but especially for our master's students in this master's program that we have. It's a one-year master's program in paleontology, and then also for our PhD students. And it's no exaggeration at all. Like, I'm being totally honest. That is the students that find the best fossils pretty much all the time. Like, there are so many things I wish I could say I found, but it's the students. It always seems to be the students, and there's something to it. I think students with their enthusiasm, with their passion, with their young eyes. I don't know what it is. They're just able to sometimes see things that others are not. And oftentimes it's students that are there for the first time. And a great example of that is Amelia here, who's in the middle of this photo. Amelia was a PhD student, not studying dinosaurs. She was studying the origin of animals and the origin of skeletons, these Precambrian, Ediacaran age things. And she came out to Skye with us, and lo and behold, just a few days into the trip, she found this thing that she's looking at, which is the skull of a pterosaur. And it turns out that it led to nearly an entire skeleton of a pterosaur. And so we have that sitting in my lab. I haven't been in my lab since March. Everything's been shut down. But I have another PhD student now, Natalia, who is working on that fossil for her PhD. And it's an amazing skeleton. It's the most complete, best preserved pterosaur from the UK since the time of Mary Anning herself, famous Mary Anning, 200 plus years ago. It's like Mary Anning found a lot of pterosaurs, then not much, and then Amelia, which is incredible. So that's one example of a student finding a great fossil. And so it's under study now. Stay tuned. We'll hopefully be able to announce more about that in the relatively nearish future. And there's just some pictures of Amelia at the actual site. There she is. The scale bar is right next to the head, and if you squint, you can see the teeth and the jaws of that pterosaur that she's looking at, which is so cool. So I owe Amelia for the rest of my life for finding this amazing fossil. And there it is. There's a close-up of the head. So much more to come. Now, some of the skull was eroded away by the tides, a little bit. Each time the tide comes, it would maybe take off a little bit, but quite a lot of it's still in the rock. We've had a CAT scan, so we'll be able to say a lot more about it. Other things that students do, we train our students in field techniques. This is Moji, who is one of our master's students. Moji came from Nigeria, and she studied fish with us, and she became an expert very quickly on the Jurassic fossil fishes of the Isle of Skye. And she wrote a really great thesis, master's thesis on those fishes. And here she is cutting out some fish teeth and some fish bones from one of the rock platforms. And she's using an angle grinder, and that's just because the rocks on Skye are so hard. They've been baked by these igneous intrusions, these volcanic systems, long after the dinosaurs lived there. So the rocks are concrete hard, and we can't normally use hammers and chisels and plaster in the way you often see dinosaurs and other fossils collected on TV. Instead, we have to cut them out. And so for small fossils like this, the small tools, they work wonders. For bigger fossils like dinosaur bones, we need bigger tools. And this is our colleague, Doogie Ross, who is literally cutting out a dinosaur bone using a diamond tip saw from this big boulder. The dinosaur bone is down here. And so luckily for us, Doogie is a builder by trade, which means a few things. It means he has his own diamond tip saws, which is wonderful, that he uses to cut rock to build houses. And secondly, he actually knows how to use the saws, and so I don't have to do that work myself. I'd probably cut off a limb if I tried to do it. But Doogie not only knows how to use them, he's an expert stonemason, so he can really tell how the rock cuts. Doogie's an incredible guy. And what's wonderful about Doogie is he's from the Isle of Skye. He grew up on Skye. He's lived on Skye his whole life. Skye at least used to be a relatively isolated community. There's a bridge now with the mainland, but that bridge is maybe a couple decades old at most. Doogie actually grew up in a Gaelic-speaking household. English is not his first language. He grew up in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, but English is not his first language. Gaelic is this ancient language of the Scottish Highlands, and he still speaks Gaelic fluently. And in fact, a few years ago, we named a new fossil, Ichthyosaur, and we gave it a Gaelic name that Doogie developed. His name Yarkbara. Now, Doogie, there's a lot of amazing things to say about him, but when Doogie was a teenager, he became very interested in the history of his native island, and he started to collect arrow points and Bronze Age artifacts, and he started to explore the old ring forts and so on. And when he was 19 years old, I believe it was, he built his own museum, this museum you see here, the Staffen Museum, and he took the ruins of a 19th century one-room schoolhouse, and he rebuilt them into this museum. And also over time, he expanded from being interested in archaeology and human history all the way to the prehistory of the island. And he became an expert fossil collector, and he's collected a lot of the most important dinosaurs and other fossils from Skye as a side hobby, essentially, while holding down a job as a builder and as a sheep herder and farmer on the side. Is really incredible. And it goes without saying, he's the only person I know who's literally built his own museum himself. So he's a great colleague to have, and it's just wonderful to work with somebody who has such a heritage on the island, and his family goes back so many generations on the island. That's okay. So that's a little background about Skye. Let me just tell you about a couple of the discoveries we've made recently. So one of those discoveries, probably my favorite one, at least one that I've made. Again, that pterosaur is so much better than this. I kind of gave away the best discovery, but ones I've actually made myself. I think this is a cool one. This is about 5 years ago. We went to the northeastern tip of the island, to this place called Duntolum, and I'm taking this picture as literally in the shadows of the ruins of this 14th century castle. So it's a very Scottish scene, at least the sort of Scotland you kind of have in your mind. It's a sunny day. Hey, look at that. It's a sunny day in Scotland. So you might be wondering, like, why are we not taking advantage of the weather? Why am I taking a picture from like by a castle and not down looking for fossils? Well, the reason is because it's high tide, and you can see that the water is lapping up against the beach. But when the tide goes down, that beach turns into a rock platform that juts out about 100 meters or so into those very, very, very cold waters of the North Atlantic. And so we went to this place because a geologist friend of ours who was mapping the rocks there found a little bone and showed it to me. And I could tell it was the jawbone of a little crocodile. The teeth had fallen out, but it was a jawbone. So that got me really excited. So I thought, oh my goodness, if this jawbone is there, maybe there's a skeleton of this crocodile, or maybe there's even a skeleton of a dinosaur. Let's go, let's see what we can find. And so we went there. We spent all day on our hands and knees looking at this rock, scrutinizing, nose to the outcrop. And we didn't find anything other than some shark teeth. So Moji loved the shark teeth. And my colleague and friend Tom Challens, who's another paleontologist in Edinburgh, he loved the shark teeth because he studies fishes. But for me, it was a very disappointing day. No dinosaurs, no crocodiles. So we started to pack up in the evening, get back to have dinner. And as we were walking back to our vehicles, we started to notice that there were these big holes on the rock platform. And we had kind of seen them earlier, but we just thought they were tide pools. And because we were scrutinizing the rock for little bones and teeth, we just weren't really looking at bigger things. We didn't have that bigger perspective. But the more as we walked back to the vehicles, we saw that actually these things covered the entire platform. There were over 100 of these circular-ish structures. And they were all about the same size and shape, and they had a pattern to them. There was a bit of this left-right zigzagging pattern. And we could see some of these things from the side, and we could see they were actually impressed into the rock, as you can see here. So these things weren't just tidal pools. They weren't just random erosion by the water today. They were formed back before that rock was rock, back when it was soft mud, by something impressing into it. And the more we looked, we saw that some of these things were filled with a harder rock that made something of a cast, and that these things had, some features to them. There's some little bumps on one side, 1, 2, 3, 4, right there. And sometimes these things were paired together, and there was a big horseshoe-shaped one and a smaller crescent-shaped one in front. They were big. They were all about the same size, but some were a little bigger than the others. And the biggest ones were about 70 centimeters across. So that's bigger than a car tire. So after a couple of minutes, it dawned on us that, hold on, actually, we had found fossils that were more than just little shark teeth. We had found dinosaur fossils, just not bones or teeth or skeletons, but a different type of fossil. We found trace fossils. These things were the footprints and handprints of dinosaurs. And there's really only one dinosaur from the Jurassic or otherwise. Really only one animal that's ever lived on land in the entire history of the Earth that was so big that it would leave an impression the size of a car tire every time its hand or feet hit the ground. And that's, of course, the sauropod dinosaur, or these giant, long-necked, tiny-headed, pot-bellied, column-limbed, plant-munching behemoth dinosaurs like Brontosaurus or Diplodocus. And so what we had on Skye, therefore, are footprints and handprints of some of the first truly giant sauropods that ever lived in the Jurassic. This was the time when sauropods were getting bigger and bigger. And the Skye sauropod was probably the size of 2 or 3 elephants put together. Much smaller than some of the sauropods that would come later, like Argentinosaurus, Titan, and Dreadnoughtus, and these things that were larger than Boeing 737 airplanes. But for their time in the Middle Jurassic, these things were giants. They were part of that big wave of dinosaurs prospering, spreading around the world, becoming dominant, growing to huge sizes after the end Triassic extinction. Now, more recently, we have gone back to Skye. We've been finding a lot of new track sites too, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this is prime ground for our students. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of exceptional students. It's been really probably the best part of my job is starting a research group, starting a lab, and having great students want to come and work with us in Edinburgh. And Paige DiPolo here is a prime example of that. Paige, like me, is from the US. She's from Nevada, so she's from out west, not from the Midwest, but she's from the US. enchanted by Scotland, really interested in ichthyosaurs, actually. And so it was when we announced that discovery of the Gallic-named ichthyosaur Yarkvara with Doogie that Paige saw that discovery and then got in touch with us and asked if she could do a master's with us. And of course, we were very excited about that because not only was Paige an excellent student, and not only did Paige have a geology background, like many paleontologists, but also as an undergrad, she majored in engineering too. So geology and engineering together. So Paige is very good at building things, at running experiments, at using instruments, building her own instruments to study things. And so Paige became this expert drone operator and used drones in addition to some of her own handmade camera equipment that she could use, that she could carry during the many times when the Scottish wind made it too difficult to fly drones, to take lots of detailed photos and stitch those together into high-resolution digital maps of these track sites, which are really important because these maps tell us how many tracks there are. It tells us which ones go together to form trackways. It tells us the spacing between the trackways, which we can use to estimate the speed of the dinosaurs. And the rocks themselves that are being mapped, they tell us about the environment. And so these maps, and this is just a screenshot of it, they're super, 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 super important. And tools like drones are now becoming widespread in paleontology for obvious reasons. But the great thing here is, Paige mastered these techniques as a young student and just did invaluable work, which, as you'll see, has resulted in several really cool papers that she's first authored. All of this, the drone maps, the rocks, all of it being put together tells us about the environment. The environment of Skye back then was probably like some of these kind of barrier island areas along the eastern coast of the US. So there were big lagoons, there were rivers that were emptying into the ocean, fringed by beaches and lagoons. It was warm, it was wet, it was subtropical. And this was the environment dinosaurs were living in. And this is what we envision those giant sauropods were doing. They were actually making those footprints in shallow water. They were wading in a lagoon. We can tell that from the type of rock that they made their footprints and handprints in. It wasn't deep water. It was probably very, very shallow, but it's an interesting environment. We don't often think of sauropods as living in those environments. Now, there's actually a lot of other footprint sites around the world that show sauropods in these kind of coastal or nearshore environments, on carbonate platforms, on beaches. So this seems like it was probably a pretty normal thing for sauropods, and that was happening at least beginning in the middle Jurassic. And it's something we can't immediately tell from their skeletons. So the footprints really help tell us that. This image shows some sauropods going out into one of these lagoons after a storm, on the lookout for the hundreds of pounds of leaves and stems that they would need to eat every day to fuel their giant body. And I think it's just a very evocative scene. And it's a wonderful piece of paleo art. Obviously, you guys just heard from Scott, who's one of the world's greatest paleo artists. And the guy who did this piece of artwork is another of the world's greatest paleo artists. His name is John Hoed. He's a Scottish guy. He lives just up the road in the town of Perth, Scotland. And he is a master at setting scenes. He is probably better than anybody I know. He's just able to put these characters together and convey an entire scene. And one of his superpowers is he knows so much about the plants of the Jurassic time and the Cretaceous time as well. He has a huge reference library on paleobotany. He knows much more about the plants and the environments than I do, and probably much more than all but a handful of leading paleobotanists. So he is an example of not only a very talented artist, but somebody who's really dedicated to the science. And we'll see another of John's works in a moment. So we described that track site about 5 years ago now in a very short initial paper. This was before Paige joined the team. There's another paper Paige is working on now that's using the drone imagery to really basically monograph that site. So stay tuned for that. So that's a pretty cool discovery, I think, but there's more, because basically every time we go to Skye, we find new fossils. And sometimes we do find bones and teeth, but a lot of times we are finding new track sites, new handprints and footprints. And some of the most recent neat discoveries have come from this place, which is a place called Brothers Point. It's a little bit of land that sticks off the east coast of Skye, jutting off a little bit into the sea. It's largely igneous rock, you can kind of tell here, but there's also a lot of sedimentary rock. And at low tide, a lot of that sedimentary rock turns into rock platforms that go out into the sea. And so you have these big bedding surfaces of limestone and mudstone. And a lot of these are covered in tracks. And here is one of these sites, and that's Paige down there taking notes on these tracks. So we have 3 sites from Brothers Point, 3 new sites. And I'm actually going to kind of go out of order a little bit, but start with what we call Brothers Point 2. It's called Brothers Point 2 because it was the second one that was actually discovered, but it was the first one we described in a paper. And this was a paper that Paige wrote as a master's student, part of her master's thesis, a first authored paper as a master's student, which is great. It wasn't her only one. So what we have at this site are more sauropod tracks, but also tracks of meat-eating theropods about the size of jeeps. And they are found in limestone that was formed in a lagoon. So this is now additional evidence that sauropods were living in these lagoons, or at least moving through these lagoons. So what we found at that first track site at Duntolum of sauropods wading in a lagoon, making footprints in shallow water, that wasn't just some one-off weird thing. We now have this at another place, and we have meat eaters there too. And then we have the other sites, what we call Brothers Point 1 and 3. And these ones we just described in a paper that was published a few months ago that Paige was the lead author on. This is the second paper that Paige published from her master's thesis as the first author. Incredible, incredible work. And what we have from these sites are totally new types of dinosaur tracks from Skye. Now at one site, this first one, Brothers Point 1, this was the first one that was discovered. It was Tom Challens that found it, my fish studying colleague in Edinburgh. And this site, here's Paige's drone map. This site has these tracks. These are tracks, handprints and footprints, so made by something that was walking on all fours. Much smaller than sauropod tracks, though. These things are only about the size of a grapefruit. And could they be from a baby sauropod? Well, they could, except that the shape of the tracks doesn't match a sauropod foot at all. These tracks, the footprints, and here's a footprint, the footprints have this distinctive kind of triangular tapering wedge shape, and the handprints have this more oval shape. Well, that's a dead ringer for a type of track that's called deltapodus, and these are widely held to be made by stegosaurs, by the dinosaurs with plates on their backs, of which Stegosaurus itself is the most famous. Now, Stegosaurus is from the late Jurassic. The oldest stegosaurs of all come from the middle Jurassic, but they're very rare. There's just a few places around the world that have very limited bones and some footprints as well. And these Skye fossils are basically right in that sort of time span. So these probably are not the single oldest stegosaurs in the world. There's some stuff from England, some stuff from Morocco that might be a little bit older, but they're essentially part of that first wave of stegosaurs that's migrating around the world. So some of the most iconic dinosaurs of all, we see them here on Skye. Now, Brothers Point 3, we see something different. This is a mud flat, so this is not in a lagoon at all. Now, the last tracks were also on a mud flat, I should say. So this is a different environment. This is fringing the lagoons, fringing the beaches. But this is mud, this is dry land these dinosaurs are walking on. So we have the stegosaurs at Brothers Point 1. At Brothers Point 3, we have 2 types of tracks. We have a theropod and we have something else. Now, this site was also discovered by a student. It was discovered by Paulo Pereira, who you can see here. Paulo was visiting us from Brazil. He was a visiting PhD student, and he was in Edinburgh for a few months, and he came out to the field with us. Very different field work than what he's used to in Brazil, which is that sort of hot, humid type of fieldwork that fits the stereotype. But Paulo found this site, another great discovery by a student. Now, again, we have 2 footprints types here on these mudflats. We have theropods, so there are meat eaters, but we also have these things, which are big 3-toed tracks, only footprints, no handprints. This thing was walking on its hind legs. Now, could it be a theropod? Yeah, maybe. Theropods, of course, have 3 toes, and they only walked on their hind legs. but the size and the shape and of the toes and the angle the toes diverge at are much more reminiscent of ornithopod dinosaurs. So that duck-billed dinosaur group of plantids. Now, it's not a slam dunk. It's very hard to tell theropods from ornithopods, not only the shape of the foot, but also so much about what a footprint looks like depends on what sort of mud or sand or limey stuff that was made in. It depends on the deformation of the rock, how deep it was buried, all kinds of things. So we can't be completely confident these were ornithopods, but they really seem to fit the bill. And if that's true, this is a new type of dinosaur for Skye and a very strange dinosaur to have in the Middle Jurassic. There is very limited evidence so far that there were big ornithopods in the Middle Jurassic, and this thing would have been big. Not enormous big, but these tracks are not quite the size of car tires, but they're just a little bit smaller. And so we're probably talking, something here that was 5 or 6 meters long, may have weighed over a ton. That's big for a bipedal duckbill lineage plant-eating dinosaur in the Middle Jurassic. And again, there are some other hints from around the world. There may have been big ornithopods at this time, but very limited fossils. So if this is true, this would add to that story. Now, John Hode, that great artist from up the road here in Perth, he made this scene showing Brothers Point 1 and Brothers Point 3, showing the mud flats and also a little bit of the lagoons in the background with the sauropod. So this is how he envisions the entire environment. He envisions the beaches and the lagoons in the background. Mud flats are shoreward from those beaches and lagoons, and you had different dinosaurs that were living and moving around in those different environments. You had the giant sauropods out in the lagoons. You had the stegosaurs and perhaps these bipedal ornithopod plant eaters on the mud flats. You had theropods that were moving between both areas, probably always on the hunt for their next meal. And so this is what Scotland would have been like 170 million years ago. So much different from today. A story that's told only through fossils and through the rocks, fossils that have mostly been found very recently, largely been found and worked on by students. And I think that's just a really cool story. And it's also a neat story that footprints can tell us so much information. Dinosaur paleontology isn't just about big skeletons and big bones. There are so many different types of fossil clues, and footprints, handprints, trackways are those clues. Dinosaur paleontology isn't just about the professors and the famous scientists discovering fossils. It is about the students. It is about the teams working together. It is about working with local people, working with local museums. It's a wonderful thing to be a part of. And for me, it's been a privilege to be welcomed to Scotland. And I'm very much at home here now, even a dual citizen, which is really something. Although there's a lot of things in the US and the UK right now not to be very proud of, but that's another story. So I'll leave it there and just say, we have all these dinosaurs on Skye. We're learning more and more each time we go. Who knows what we'll find again? We were due to do more field work this year that had to be canceled because of the pandemic, but we'll be out there again. We always go with our students every year, and who knows what we'll find next. So I will end there, and I am very happy to take any questions or have any kind of discussion anybody wants. So I don't know how people are doing this, if you're just posting questions or people are raising their hands or whatever, but
we do have some donation questions.
Yep.
Let me see. There was one that was earlier.
We've got one from Jack Cooper that was a few hours ago asking, how goes the research/writing of your new book on mammals? Are there any species you're particularly looking forward to writing about?
Jack, if you're on here, I saw you were tweeting out about this too, so thanks for helping spread the word. And thanks for checking in about the book. So I wrote a dinosaur book a couple years ago called The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, which was a lot of fun. It was kind of an adult pop science book. And I tried to tell the story of dinosaur evolution in that book and weave in stories of, my work and work of my students and colleagues and so on. And so I'm following, I'm actually doing a kid's version of that, kind of like a middle grade reader's version that'll come out next March, I think. But the real follow-up to it is another adult pop science book on mammals, the logical next place to take it. So I ended the dinosaur book with the story of the dinosaur extinction, and then the story of working in New Mexico, which is one of the best places in the world to discover fossils of the mammals that took over from the dinosaurs. And so really the next step was to do an entire book on mammals. So I've been working on it. It's tough during the pandemic to get much time, and especially with the little guy at home, and just doing a lot more childcare, which has been wonderful. It's been great to have so much time with a young one. He's turned 8 months old today, by the way. So, I'm plugging away on it, and it's still taking shape. You write these things, you never know exactly how it's going to go until you start writing. I've been writing about early mammals so far, about the origin of mammals, what makes a mammal, that kind of stuff. I've been really reveling in learning more about mammals. I was trained to study dinosaurs. Dinosaurs have really been my thing, but my research is turning more towards mammals. And so many of the students in my lab are actually working on mammal evolution now. We work very closely with Tom Williamson in New Mexico, John Weibel in Pittsburgh, Michelle Spalding in the US, a few other colleagues. And we're trying to build a big family tree of early placental mammals, understanding our own origins and how placental mammal evolution was affected by the end Cretaceous extinction. So it's that aspect of things that I'm really looking forward to writing about in the book. But of course, who can go wrong with mammoths and saber-tooths and everything else? So I've been having a lot of fun with it, a lot of fun, and I've been learning a lot. And I don't know when it will be out for sure, but keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'm just excited I get the chance to do another book.
For sure, sounds exciting. We have another question from Emily Keeble, asking, are there any plans for field work to the Triassic deposits in Scotland, for example, the Elgin deposit, the sandstones?
Yeah, that's a great question, Emily. Yeah, it's funny to say that because, in Illinois where I'm from, there's a place called Elgin. It's one of the suburbs of Chicago, and it's named after the Scottish town of Elgin. I always mix them up. And when I do my lectures, I talk about the Elgin reptiles, and I'm always paranoid that I'm going to pronounce it the Illinois way. But anyway, yes, there are. So Skye has Jurassic age fossils. And those are dinosaurs. And there's mammals from Skye, there's amphibians, there's reptiles, there's of course pterosaurs, there's lots of other things. There are no Cretaceous dinosaurs, or really much Cretaceous at all in Scotland. There is some Triassic. Now, there are no Triassic dinosaurs, at least nothing that's unequivocally a dinosaur. But there are some Triassic fossil reptiles and synapsids as well, and other, more lizardy-looking things. And these come from this place called Elgin, which is up in the Highlands. It is right for those of you that know anything about whiskey. It's right in that area of Scotland, the Speyside area, where a lot of the distilleries are. And there's some quarries there where sandstone was quarried out to make, largely for building stone. So a lot of the buildings in that area are made of this sandstone. Even some buildings in Edinburgh, including the National Museum of Scotland, has facades of this gorgeous Elgin sandstone. There's at least one. There's a few layers actually, but at least one really good layer in the quarries where there are fossils that are preserved in that sandstone. Fossil skeletons, but they're preserved in a strange way. The bones have mostly eroded away, essentially leaving voids in the rock. It's just really weird. So people in the past would crack these things open and pour plaster inside, and later pour latex and plastic and stuff, and then pull those things out and then use those things as casts, essentially, of that void space, and then describe those bones. And some of these things that were found, goodness, nearly a century ago, or even more than a century ago, maybe, were things like Scleromachilus, which might be a close pterosaur relative, Saltopus, which might be a stem dinosaur, a dinosauromorph, Pediceuchus and Ornithosuchus, and all kinds of crocodile-line archosaurs. There are not a lot of new discoveries from that area. The quarries are mostly closed, from what I understand. But one of my former PhD students, Davide Fofa, who's an Italian guy who, of course, now lives in Scotland, he finished his PhD. He did his PhD on marine reptiles, so he's a real expert on ichthyosaurs and pliosaurs, plesiosaurs. He's now doing a postdoc in Edinburgh where he's studying a lot of those Elgin fossils, and he's doing the natural thing you would do in today's world. He's CT scanning now. And the scans he's produced so far, of course, has been cut short, some of the work, or at least put on hiatus because of COVID, but the scans he's produced so far have been gorgeous. And so he's seeing detail of these bones that was just not available to any of the previous workers. And his first manuscript is in review now, it's been submitted. But he is studying a lot of these Elgin reptiles. So stay tuned to that. There should be a lot more detail on these things. And we should now have a better idea of, is Scleromachilus really a thing closely related to pterosaurs? Is Saltopus really a dinosauromorph? Or maybe it could even be a dinosaur. The more we can see better images and better detail of the bones, the better we can place these things in family trees.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I look forward to learning more about that. Let's see, more questions.
I just realized I've been muted for a while. Well, okay, that explains that. Come on, people, donate and get your questions answered.
Yeah, please do. Anything you want to ask while you have me here, and again, if anything about Scottish dinosaurs, about dinosaur evolution, about Jurassic World, about anything.
I do have a comment that I really enjoyed the rise and fall of the dinosaurs.
Well, thank you.
I have both a copy right here and the Badlands Dinosaur Museum based out of Dickinson, North Dakota, ended up listening to the audiobook while we were pulling out a Judith River Tyrannosaur last year. So that was fun times.
Hopefully it was motivational for you. I mean, there's always these stories of crews, listening to different types of rock music or whatever, digging up their dinosaurs and naming them after the, artists and stuff, like with, Machikosaurus and Mark Knopfler and all that. So if you guys are listening to a dinosaur audiobook, hey, great. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it didn't seem too strange as you were actually doing the real hard work of getting a dinosaur out. And that's great. There's another Tyrannosaur fossil. Like that just has me excited.
There are a number of Judith River Tyrannosaurs. There's one that is currently awaiting its helicopter.
Oh, okay.
Which I believe is going to be at the end of this summer. Denver Fowler and Liz Friedman Fowler are actually out right now working on getting some of that stuff out right now. And I think there's at least 2 other Tyrannosaurs that are on the docket for this summer. I should probably look at the schedule since I'm supposed to be out there in like 2 weeks. But
no, I saw that Denver was posting something about the small crews being able to go out during the summer, which is great. I'm just really happy to hear that there are some crews that are able to go out, presumably in a safe way. I just hope everybody's being safe, but I'm sure I'm sure they are.
Yeah. Well, I've looked at the field protocol for COVID stuff, and anyone who's coming in is supposed to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And since we're all rather, good, we're all good friends and we know each other, so we know that we're not going to be stupid. I don't think there's any like usual random volunteers that haven't been vetted before. And I think it's only going to be like one person going in on town day, if even that. We may just I know that they picked up some solar showers, and we may just have to make sure you have enough clean underwear and socks for a while to cut down on laundry. So there's at least some people managing to get out.
It is so tough. So many of us are just not being able to do field work this year, and really really missing it. I don't think a lot of us, well, maybe a lot of us did kind of realize how strange it was going to be, but I think people like me, it's like, oh wow, I'm really I'm really really lamenting not being able to do it. It's just such a part of our lives and a part of our jobs, of course, but just a part of our passion. And so, for it's like reason number 10,000 on the list of why we want to get through this pandemic as quickly and fully as we can. But it's just another one of those things that, we've lost this year, many more important things, but it's we're chomping to go. So I'm glad Denver and Liz are out there, and I hope they find some great stuff. I'm sure they will. They always do. They seem to.
Well, while we're waiting on more donation questions, a person in the chat asked, any take on whether or not juvenile sauropods could move bipedally?
That's a good question. I'll admit to not being much of a sauropod expert. Most of my background really is in theropods. I mean, so many of us are so uber specialized in what we actually really know. And by finding some of these sauropod tracks, I learned more about sauropods and about how they moved and how they walked and so on. There's no doubt that once they got to a certain size, they had to walk quadrupedally. I mean, their entire skeletons are built essentially so they can support their vast weight, and that's walking on these 4 columnar limbs. And they probably had to do that. I mean, I could only guess at what size that became absolutely necessary, but probably from a pretty small size. But I do know that there are some eggs and some embryos and some hatchlings of things like Massospondylus, and also some other prosauropod grade things from China. That if I remember those papers, and I might be misremembering, but if I remember those papers, these are papers of people like Robert Rice and that crew, that maybe some of these sauropods may have been a bit bipedal when they were young. Of course, their ancestors, the prosauropod grade from the Triassic and early Jurassic, some of those things were bipedal, or at least could move bipedally some of the time. So, the locomotion of the earliest sauropodomorphs seems quite complex, and it might mean that maybe very, very young, or hatchling sauropods, or at least hatchlings of some sauropod species, maybe could move on 2 legs for a little bit of time. But I have to look at those papers again to make sure I'm remembering. But for those of you that are interested, look up, do a Google Scholar search for prosauropod, or sauropodomorph eggs, embryos, hatchlings. Look up Robert Rice and that team, and take a look at what they actually found, which may or may not be what I'm saying.
Cool. Yeah. Somebody else wants to hear if you have any more tidbits on tyrannosaurs.
Ooh, yeah, well, God, I'm full of tidbits on tyrannosaurs. I bore everybody all the time talking about T-Rex. One thing to check out for those of you, maybe some of you have seen this, but Thomas Carr just a couple weeks ago published his big magnum opus on Tyrannosaur ontogeny. So looking at how T-Rex changed from very young juvenile into this enormous bust-sized bone-crunching adult. Bone crunching, as we know from Karen's work, of that huge coprolite with those big chunks of bone, which, that came out when I was in high school. I just remember, and that's when I met you, Karen, at the Berkeley Museum way back, when you were talking about that. That just blew me away. But T-Rex that's one example of just how amazing of an animal T-Rex was. That's why I love T-Rex. It's not just because it's the movie star dinosaur and all that. It's because it was a feat of evolution. This was, again, a bust-sized animal. It could bite through the bones of its prey. It grew so fast that it reached adult size by 20-something years old. It was dead by the time it was 30. I mean, just a stunning animal. And it not only was big and brawny, but it had brains too. So some of the work that we've done of studying primitive tyrannosaurs, these smaller dog-sized, human-sized, horse-sized ancestors of T-Rex, show that these things were evolving bigger brains, higher intelligence, keener senses, especially their senses of smell and hearing, back when they were small, probably to survive in those smaller niches during a time when allosaurs and megalosaurs and so on were thriving at the top of the food chain. So those tyrannosaurs were, surviving in the understory, and then they had their opportunity later in the Cretaceous to move into those top predator roles when the allosaurs either went extinct or they became really reduced in diversity. And tyrannosaurs were able to move in so quickly and so competently because they had the brawn and they had the brains. And I just love that about T-Rex. This wasn't just some brutish monster, but it was a smart and also brutish monster.
For sure. Got 3 minutes to go. Do you have any other questions?
What is your favorite Tyrannosaur?
Oh, I mean, T-Rex, I gotta be honest. I mean, it's gotta be T-Rex. And, I don't know if Tom Holtz is still on here. Yeah, I see you're on there, Tom. I mean, come on, right? I mean, come on. We're fanboys when it comes down to this. But it's all Tyrannosaur evolution that's fascinating. What just blows me away about Tyrannosaurs is how they had an evolutionary history that was over 100 million years long. The oldest ones were really small. They were human size or even smaller. They were fast. They had longer limbs. They had more fingers than T-Rex. They had big claws. A lot of them had crests of bone on their head and all kinds of wacky features. And that's what Tyrannosaurs were like for most of their history. It was only very late that they took over that top predator role. And I just think it's a neat story of evolution, kind of plugging along. Tyrannosaurs were doing great. They were doing great in that second or third tier predator role, and they had a chance to do something new, and they took advantage. And I don't even know why. I just remember I was telling somebody last year, maybe it was in one of my classes or something, around the time that the movie with Lady Gaga came out, where she was nominated for the Oscar stuff. And I was like, Tyrannosaurs are like that, Lady Gaga was this great singer for many years, and then all of a sudden, she's also one of the world's best actresses. How about that? And Tyrannosaurs to me were like that. They were great at that second or third tier predator role, so good at it. They persisted for so long. They lived so many places, and then towards the end, they just jumped up in size and became the biggest, scariest monsters, that fuel our dreams, fuel our imagination, and who knows where they would have gone if that asteroid didn't come down.
Well deserving of their title, it sounds like. Well, all right. This has been a really great presentation and conversation. Thank you so much, Steve.
My pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. I wish I could stay here, everybody, but just again, what you're doing is great. These are all such great causes that money's going towards, and I'm just happy I could play a tiny part here in something that's so much more important than the little minutiae that we do in our day-to-day lives of studying dinosaur bones. This is a big deal, and I just love to see that so many people from around the world have been taking part in this. So again, just cheers to Meg and to Haley and the others that are put this together, and thanks to all of you who have donated. And I hope we can all continue to play whatever role we can in whatever small ways of just making the world a better place. So, great to chat with you all again. If you want to, got any other questions or just want to say hi or whatever, just drop me an email. And hopefully when things start opening up again, we'll be able, a lot of us, to cross paths again at SBPs or PaleoFest or whatever. And if any of you are in the UK, if you're in Edinburgh, please let me know. Please come by and say hi and come meet our crew, especially a lot of these great students.
Oh, awesome. We will definitely do that if any of us ever get over to the UK. Thanks again.
All right, thanks. And Karen, I'm sorry I can't stick around for you.
No, thank you so much. That was very cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. See you guys later. Take care, everybody. Bye.